Okay, all right, now I can go. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for stopping in on, I know it's a busy day and some of you have to duck out a little bit early, but I actually approached MDP and TCD and said, you know, I've got some really interesting data to share. Just got back from Honduras a couple of weeks ago, and I think that with everything that's going on in the political landscape and in the discourse around migration in Central America, that it's a good time to go ahead and start getting some of this information out in terms of what's actually going on in this region. And so what I'm going to present on today is very preliminary research. It's largely based on our observations, researcher notes. We had a team of between 7 and 8, depending upon how many people were there at once. And we would do a lot of discussion about what's going on. And so I don't have the hard data behind this yet, although I'm very, very confident that what I'm going to show you today is going to bear out in our quantitative data, especially, and then also in our qualitative. So what we're talking about here really is this connection between the social, economic, and ecological system in the rural area of Western Honduras. And this project came about largely out of my own curiosity. So a couple of years ago, I was starting to get really interested. I worked in Honduras for a very long time. I served in Peace Corps there. I did my dissertation research there. I go back frequently to do development projects and so on. So I've worked in the country for about 10 years. And over those 10 years, I've seen a lot of changes and really started getting very curious about the connection between food security and citizen security. And so we had a little bit of money left over from a project that finished right at the end of my PhD. And they allowed me to take that money down and do a preliminary investigation. So that was in one municipality. And we didn't get a great evidence on the connection between food security and citizen security, mainly because we didn't ask some of the right questions, which is a good learning experience. But we did get some really, really interesting evidence into how violence is serving, in some cases, as a form of empowerment. And so I presented this information to USAID on the way out, and they were very, very curious and asked a lot of really great questions. And I basically said, like, I don't know the answer to that. You know, I'd have to come back and do a bigger study. I don't know. So they contacted me and said, we want you to come back and do a study in 4 municipalities. You know, how much would it cost? And which is exactly what you want to hear, right? We want you to come back and how much would it cost? They kind of gave me a cap, and so I planned it out. And it took quite a long time because there were changeovers in the mission, but then they actually had me come back and start looking really closely at the connection between climate change, food security, and violence. Around all the same time becomes this migration crisis, and USAID in Honduras is now panicking because they are losing funding. They're stressed they're going to lose all of their funding. They are seeing a lot of pushback from the White House in terms of what they're doing. And as I'm sure you've all seen in the news, all of this vitriol over Central Americans. And so when I went to the mission to kind of plan out what we were going to do, they basically said, like, we are desperate for anything that you can tell us about what is going on in terms of migration and why and where and what are the drivers and so on. So we rolled that in as a major piece of the study. And that's kind of how we ended up where we are. So what we are looking at is the connection between climate change, agricultural productivity, food security, rural livelihoods, migration, and violence. So there's a lot of variables at play there, which is why I'll probably be doing a lot of presentations over the next several months, because I'll have to do it in little pieces. So this is where we are. So we chose 5 municipalities. They were very purposefully chosen based on certain characteristics. So if you notice, Nueva Arcadia and Ocotepeque are near the border. So we wanted to get that as one of our variables in terms of this transnational traffic. Nueva Arcadia is a known to be on the narco-trafficking route. La Esperanza is a predominantly Lenca indigenous group. Ocotepeque, primarily the Maya Tortí indigenous group. And we had suspected from the pilot that there's something going on with the indigenous groups that's actually different than the mestizo population. Marcala we chose because we have been hearing a lot about violence increasing in Marcala, but there wasn't necessarily statistics behind that. But all of these communities, all of these municipalities that we chose have from a medium to a very high level of outmigration, and or a very high level of violence as determined by homicides. So just a couple of more maps so you can kind of see what's going on. So these are the same areas, and this is a map about food insecurity in 2015. And it's actually quite old. All of these maps are pretty old. I was trying to find updated things, and there's just not a lot out there that's been updated. So even when you look at this, you'll see that 3 of the communities are in areas that were predicted to be food insecure. I would argue from our results that all 5 are actually quite food insecure. And then this is really important because I think it's important to know in context that Honduras is one of the top countries in the world for the effects of climate change already, and it's predicted to get more and more severe over time. So this is data from the United Nations from the past 50 years, and then this is the prediction going forward into 2070. So as you can see, Honduras is predicted to become very, very dry. And this is a massive problem because most of the country is dependent on some type of either agriculture, livestock, fishing, so on and so forth. So this is a map that I've seen quite a lot in different versions. And it basically is the narco-trafficking, the known narco-trafficking routes. So in the kind of pink, you can see these are the areas that are considered to be the most violent municipalities. And again, this map was from 2014, but the original map that I saw that looks exactly like this is really from 2012. So again, this is quite outdated. And one of the things that I will be talking about is that we've actually are documenting quite a few changes in the way the narco-trafficking routes are working. So theoretically, we have 2 sites that are in the narco-trafficking routes, very violent areas, and 3 that are not. But what we actually found is quite different. So this is another older map in terms of migration. And this is, I believe this is based on people who were returned to their communities. I actually have a much newer map, but I was told by USAID I was not allowed to share it because it was internal to them. And these little blue dots where my communities are actually quite a bit larger now than they were. And so this is one of the reasons why they sent us, is because, you know, these little bitty dots in the rural areas have just completely exploded in the past couple of years. So what did we do? So this was a large study. As I said, I had a team of 7 to 8 people. Colleen was one of them. Poor thing, she had to traipse all around Honduras this summer, and got sick in the whole. Yeah, she had the perfect practicum experience, right? You got to get sick, or did you really actually do any overseas research? So we surveyed 1,000 households. This is all the quantitative methods were all using cluster stratified random sampling. So 1,000 surveys over roughly 10 communities over the 4 municipalities. And then we did about 5,000 surveys in schools, and that was from ages about 12 up until 27, 28 years old, depending upon where they are. The schools were public schools. We knocked the private schools out of our sample on the assumption that people who are going to the private schools are probably better off in terms of their economic situation. And this does include evening schools, weekend schools, across the landscape. And we included the 6th grade level, which is quite young. When you go in and you're asking them very sensitive questions, and they're like basically 11 or 12 years old, it's very uncomfortable. But the reason why we do that is because in Honduras, there is a massive drop in especially boys who go to school between 6th and 7th grade. So we wanted to at least capture the 6th graders before we lost them out of the school system. So the household surveys, we rotated between a woman, a man, and a young person, depending upon who was available in the household. The survey was only given to 1 person per household because the questions were very sensitive, and we didn't want other people knowing what was asked. And then we have around more than 100 hours of recordings. So we have a lot of interviews, and the interviews and focus groups included key informants, included organizations that are working in the variables under study, so NGOs, governmental organizations, international NGOs. They were covering, because of the amount of things we had to ask, different focus groups had different foci, if you will. So we also, within the communities, we would do a focus group that was really focused on agriculture. and what was going on in climate change. And then we would do a different one focused on migration and another one focused on violence. And so that was repeated several times. And then we also had several participatory methods. My favorite of which is a peer-to-peer interview where we teach the kids how to interview each other. And then we give them a recording device, and then we split and let them have at it. And I have an article that'll be coming out on this soon because it works really, really well. You try to do a focus group with 15-year-olds. It is so painful. The recordings are just like silence, you know what I mean? And then me asking the question again, and it's just like, it was just the worst. So we ended up using this peer-to-peer method. It works really, really well. And the recordings were anywhere from 8 minutes for the kids who just kind of were like, to some of them are close to an hour long. So sometimes they really, really, really get into it. So it's a really fantastic method. It works really well. I haven't even listened to those recordings yet. So we have, I think, 78 or 80 of them, something like that. Colleen also, for her practicum, managed to find a group of returned migrants who had returned in the past year. And they had some very compelling stories as well. So we have just a mountain of data. So what we're really finding here is a connection between those socio-political, ecological, and economic systems that we are finding is leading towards migration as the primary livelihood strategy in the rural areas of Honduras. So what does this look like? All right. So this is kind of our subway map. And this, again, this is all based off of what people directly told us in the field. We still need to go back and look at all the quantitative data to verify all of this. But in terms of what we understand that's happening, we're seeing a massive increase in the irregularity of weather patterns. So decreased rain, decreased availability of water, increased drought. In some areas, they're saying it's been drought for 7 years. Increases in temperatures. And then some really odd things happening with severity of storms. And all of these things have been predicted to happen in Honduras, but it's happening much faster than it was originally predicted. So, you know, you may have seen in Mexico City, there was that really freak hailstorm that just buried Mexico City in hail last summer. Yeah. All right, well, the same thing happened in Honduras and just absolutely wiped out agriculture productivity in large parts of Honduras because we have a picture of about 2 feet of just ice that just fell out of the sky. And other things as well, freak winds, floods, and of course the floods are related to deforestation as well. And then we're seeing increase in pests and diseases when they're telling us, like, in the past year, the past 3 years, the past 5 years, depending upon the pest, and also very closely related to altitude. So for example, one of the areas that we were working, it was very high up the mountain, predominantly coffee growing area. They grow what they call special coffee, which means that it's above a certain altitude, it's organic, you know, all of that good stuff. And for the first time this year, they're seeing what they call roya, which is coffee rust. And if you are familiar with coffee rust, it's extremely destructive to the coffee plant. And they are seeing, depending upon where they are on the mountain, they started getting it 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or in this past year. And there are other things too. These are just 4 of about 10 different pests or funguses and so on that they've identified that have come into the community very recently. And most of these are related to climate change. So then, and this actually directly affects what's going on in the economic system because we're seeing big decreases in agricultural productivity. So because of the pests, because of the lack of water, there's not very much irrigation. And irrigation is actually really funny. We had one person say, like, oh yeah, we have irrigation. USAID came and they put in this really great irrigation system. And he's like, well, but the water table's too low, so it doesn't really work in the summer. But in the rainy season, it works great. And I was like, does it work great in the rainy season, or is it just raining in the rainy season, you know? So even the irrigation systems that exist at the moment, the water table is so low that they're really non-functional. And we're also seeing increases in the price of inputs, so fertilizers and so on and so forth. And that leads to people planting less and using less inputs, which also has an impact on what's actually produced. There's also very low prices for crops right now, very, very low. I mean, just tragically low. And when I asked them why, they said, you know, of course, there's the issue of middlemen, which we all know, like without the middlemen, you would make more money. But there's also coyotes. Coyotes are a group that of individuals that come in when the prices are really low and people are desperate to get rid of their crops and undersell them. And so the coyotes are setting extremely low prices, and a lot of these communities are more isolated. So there's no way for them to actually get to market, so they're forced to sell at a loss. There's also imported crops from Mexico and Guatemala that are that they feel like are undermining the local economy. And then this was one of the, I mean, I must have asked 100 times, like, is this coming in legally or illegally? Well, it turns out that there are also crops coming in illegally over the border from Guatemala, because they can sell it at a price from Guatemala to Honduras that's better for them, but then that undercuts the Honduran market. And then, of course, just worldwide, the prices for certain crops, such as coffee, are quite low. So all this leads to decreased production, increased crop losses, and then that just feeds into everything. Inability to pay loans from the banks, which means that people lose their lands. And in several communities, this was actually the #1 reason people cited for why they're migrating to the US, is because they can't pay their loans, they're going to lose their land, so they migrate to send money back to pay the banks. This results in low ability to purchase anything. And, you know, on-farm labor is extremely seasonal. And right now, they're paying very, very low, if at all. So a lot of times when we were in the household survey, you say, is there work in this? Is there work in that? They say, well, there's a lot of work in agriculture, but nobody will pay you for it, right? And there are cases where they told us they're getting paid 50 or 60 lempiras a day to go pick chile, which is roughly about $2.50. And back 10 years ago, when I was working with communities, 120 lempiras a day was considered the minimum. So, you know, they're really working at pauper's wages just to have any money at all. This all trickles into off-farm labor, because if there's no money to buy anything, then even pulperias and small businesses within the community, also there's no liquid money for them to actually use for other businesses. So the other businesses all start to fail as well. It's all so dependent on the crops in this system. And you know, there's a huge push in development for value addition. So you take your crops and turn it into something else and then sell it and market it, which is brilliant, except that you have to have that base product first. And so climate change is wiping out your coffee, wiping out your corn, and so on and so forth. You know, you can't actually add value to anything because you run into a big problem, which I'll show you in one of the case studies. So all of this is connected to food insecurity, and then we get the social system overlaid on top of it. So there are, as you are probably not surprised to hear, there's extreme issues of violence external to communities on a state level, very low trust in the government. That's actually one of the questions we asked is, you know, how much can you trust the government of Honduras? And I probably did, you know, maybe at least 100 of the household surveys myself, and every single time they just laugh. Or they look at you for a minute and they go, no, hombre, no. You know, you can't trust the government. But there's also no trust of the police. There's no trust of local governments. There's very low trust in cooperatives. And there's even low trust in community leaders. So this in the social sciences, this really signals a major breakdown of community norms and community level trust, which is extremely worrying. That's one of the major pushes towards one of the major factors that we have. And when illicit activity no longer becomes a moral conflict. So then we also have the emergence of maros and narcos. Now this is actually one, to me, I hate to say one of the most exciting things that we found because it's horrible, but it's exciting in the terms of like, this is something that we see that's new. USAID had said, like, we have been hearing that in certain areas that the narco traffickers and gangs are moving into rural areas, and we want to know if that's really happening. Every single one of the communities that we randomly sampled had gang or narco trafficking presence. And these are communities that are a minimum of 40 minutes away by car of the nearest urban area. So these are properly rural communities, but they all had some type of gang or narco presence, even the ones that are way over in that map from where these violent areas and narco trafficking routes are. And so what we're seeing is, even in the rural areas, people are having to pay more taxes, even for something like a pulperia. We're seeing big increases in the sale of drugs, the use of drugs, especially among youth and especially among boys. And they are forcing a lot of people in the rural areas to cooperate, to hold drugs, to inform on other people, to inform on when the cops are coming in, to be lookouts, so on and so forth. There's also a lot of voluntary cooperation because, to be honest, this is a good job, right? The narco traffickers and the gang members, they pay. And so if there's no work, and then we're seeing some really interesting things like the purchase of rural lands by gangs and narco traffickers, especially narco traffickers. And this was kind of surprising. Like, why would they buy rural lands? And I found last night when I was looking at maps, I found one potential explanation that I'll show you at the end of why that is. A lot of times they're buying land that butts up against either protected watersheds or national forests. So makes for really nice protected narco trafficking routes, right? When you own the land and the rest of it's national forest. So on top of this, you've got this community level disruption. So there's this constant fear of violence. You can feel it in the air in Honduras when you're there. Extreme corruption, distrust. The stigmatization of youth is a severe issue in Honduras, especially boys, where there's this pervasive fear and distrust of young men. And that is feeding directly into these issues of masculinity. So what makes a man, right? And what are the social norms that are put on men? And a lot of that is to provide for families, to behave in certain ways. And so this is one of the reasons why we see a lot of men that are migrating out of Honduras, because they can't provide for their families, and they can't get a job. They're not going to school. And so migration becomes a real opportunity. And then we also see them going into a lot of illicit activity because it's an issue of power, right? So when you don't have any power, participating in something like a gang is a really great way to feel like you have control and power over your life and to get assets, right? And then one of the things that we were asking is, why are so many boys not going to school? And it really comes down to the opportunity cost. And one guy said, look, these boys are looking around and they're seeing their friends with high school diplomas and university degrees without any jobs. So they're saying, like, why would I waste my time going to school and paying for that and living in the city on the weekends and suffering to get a degree when there's no jobs? And true to fact, there were so many people, even in the rural areas, who had high school or college level degrees with no jobs. And even at the master's degree level. And jobs that we would think are high demand, like teaching, nursing, no jobs. So all of this is working in a system, and that's what we want to show. I want to show you in these couple case studies in terms of, we treat these issues as independent issues. We look at the ecological, we look at climate change, we look at agriculture, we look at violence, but we don't look at them and how they're interacting with one another. And this is especially true of USAID, who funded this project, in terms of the way that they're treating violence. So all of their funding for violence prevention is focused in urban areas. But not only does that discount household intrafamilial violence that happens in the rural areas, but we actually are seeing that that's not what's happening in the urban areas is directly influencing what's happening in the rural areas. Okay, so as a point of interest, here are some points of decision to migrate that people told us. And so you can kind of see it's pretty obvious. It's where all of these issues kind of come together. And then there's really no other viable livelihoods. So I'm going to tell you for the next time probably just two case studies that I think are really illustrative of what's going on here. So the first is a guy named Daniel. Daniel is a mechanic that we met up in a very high community. He grew up on a coffee farm. His father had about 15 hectares of coffee production. It was very successful coffee production. It was good enough that that their whole family was supported by it. They sold international markets and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, with climate change, they started seeing an increase in pests. And these are both pictures from the farm next to where theirs used to be. And so they were, for a while, able to control with fungicides and different types of pesticides and so on and so forth. But that stopped working over time, and the issue started to become more and more severe. So they started planting less, losing crops, selling off their land little by little, and over a period of several years, they ended up having to give up on coffee production at all because they were operating at a loss for several years in a row. This is a story that we've heard repeated all over Western Honduras. And so they ended up having to sell their farm, and Daniel, this young man, he moved into San Pedro Sula to look for a job. So this guy was quite enterprising. This is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to him. And so he would walk from house to house, charge a small fee to pick up their garbage, would take the garbage to the incinerator, and would do that every day for from about 4 a.m. till about noon. And he saved up enough money to buy a bicycle so he could increase what he was doing. Eventually, he saved up enough money to buy a truck. And so, so he was actually doing quite well in terms of finding a livelihood in San Pedro Sula. During the afternoons, he also apprenticed at a mechanic shop. And that was he told us, from about noon to about 8. So he's working 16-hour days to try to make ends meet. But unfortunately, he had a falling out with one of his coworkers. His coworker put a piece of equipment into his car, said that he had stolen it, and then he was fired from that job. And they told him, get out of San Pedro Sula because you can't be here anymore. So it was really unfortunate. But again, he's an enterprising guy, so he stuck around. He learned how to paint houses. Yep. He is probably 34, 35, young guy. Yeah, young guy. He has a little kid. He's got several little kids that are all younger than 5. So he's not very old. So he learns how to paint houses. He learns how to do construction, all these different things to make ends meet. And he has this basically survival livelihood in San Pedro Sula. Well, he was living with his cousin. Turns out his cousin was associated with a high-level gang in Honduras. Around this time, this would have been around 2015, 2016, there was a big crackdown in a lot of the gangs, which does not mean the gangs disappear, by the way. What that means is that there becomes a struggle for power. That's what happened with this gang. The gang leadership changed. He was not in good favor with the gang leadership, and so they killed him, and very brutally. And then Daniel was told by the gang that basically his whole family was targeted to be killed, which is very common. They don't just kill the person associated with the gang, they'll kill your entire family. And so he had to flee San Pedro Sula for threat of losing his life. So he went back to the community that he grew up in and started his own mechanic shop with the tools that he had. So around this same time is when all these problems start happening in the rural areas, the drought, the lack of agricultural productivity, and so on. So, you can imagine that the few people in the community that have a car, when the car breaks, they can't necessarily afford to pay for the fixes. So now this guy has, when we visited him, at least 10 or 12 trucks that are sitting on his front lawn that he's holding as collateral because the people who own them can't afford to pay for the fixes. So he's operating his business at a loss, again, because there's no market for this in the rural area. And then you can also imagine all these people whose cars are being held, that they're losing their livelihoods as well. So he's faced with, basically, as he sees it, he's faced with 3 options. The first option, he goes to the bank, he asks for a loan to float his business to get through this hard time. But because his family had lost their coffee farm, he was ineligible for any loans. Banks wouldn't give him any money. Around the same time, in this rural area, and this actually happened while we were there to another family. If there's time, I'll tell you about that story, because it was really bizarre to be sitting there when it happened. The narco-trafficking organizations came. This is really high up in the middle of nowhere, rural area, by the way. And they basically said, we want you to hold drugs for us, we'll pay you. And then they said, we'd be really interested, since you're a mechanic, you'd be really great for us if you would, traffic for us, basically, help move from point A to point B. He can fix the cars or whatever. So he thought about it, and he decided that ultimately he didn't want to do that because he's got these little kids and he didn't want anything to happen to them. So as of now, he hasn't faced any repercussions from that, but it definitely has scared him. Third option was a family member called from the other side of the country in Olancho, which is way in the east, and said, hey, like, you can come here and open your mechanic shop. We'll float you the money. You can start your business over again. You'll do really great here, we think. But just so you know, this area is controlled by this particular narco-trafficking group. So any business that happens in this area has to go through them, which basically means that you would work for them. And so they're not going to ask you to do anything bad or whatever. Just know that when you come here, that's the situation. It's not, And so, you know, he thought about that and basically was like, well, I'm just going to put you right back where I was in San Pedro Sula. You know, if I go over there, yeah, maybe I'll make money, but I'm working for a narco trafficking organization. And so right around this same time, a couple of weeks before we met him, his cousin, who lives in the same community, was in a couple communities over and was murdered by the gangs in San Pedro Sula that he had fled from to begin with. So, you know, this issue of the city versus the rural area is not separated. And since we're seeing the narco traffickers and the gangs coming further and further into the rural communities, you know, this guy lost his cousin. Another one of his cousins was cut up by machete. He survived. I don't know how. And so now he's afraid for his life. And so at the point that we met him, he had decided that he was gonna leave and go to the U.S. Right. So I'm going to tell you one more so that we have plenty of time for questions. And, you know, these are case studies. And so the natural inclination for me as a presenter is for you to go, well, yeah, but this is one dude. The reason why I'm showing you these particular case studies is that they are really illustrative of what we're seeing on a wide scale in the western area of Honduras. His story is not unique. What makes him unique is only that he has a trade. But beyond that, what's happening to him is very commonly what we're seeing on a wider scale. So I'm going to tell you about Dennis because this is a case of value addition and this push to add value as a primary livelihood strategy to make people better off. So Dennis grew up in a house that was based on subsistence agriculture. He's also, I'd say, about mid-30s as well. These mid-30s guys really like to talk to us. In both these case studies are men, but we had many of women as well, just so you know. So he grew up in subsistence agriculture. And his mom happened to be really good at making this product called rosquillas, which are not the same as in other countries. In Honduras, they are made out of corn in queso seca, and they're ground up. It's kind of like a Cheez-It that's really dry and with less flavor. Delicious. You know, I love them. I served in Peace Corps in the community that is known for making these, and they were crazy good. But like Colleen can tell you, she tried one and her face was like what is this dry, powdery horribleness? I love them. I think they're great. So anyway, so this particular family, she was really good at rosquillas, and she would gift them to people, and they said you should start a business. So she started a very small business, you know, selling rosquillas to other people, eventually to other communities, and eventually their business actually got good enough that they were able to send Dennis to college. So, which is really unheard of in the rural areas. So they sent him to university, and he got a degree in business and came back and started working with the rosquilla business. They expanded. They were working. They were selling direct to some of the large producers or large vendors, excuse me, and the business was quite successful. So most of their corn, or actually all of their corn, actually came from the local communities. So when the local communities would grow their corn, whatever excess that they had that they didn't need for livelihood, they would sell to the rosquilla makers. And they bought their corn from several communities around. And it was quite successful. It was a benefit to them. It was a benefit to the company. And it was just this really nice kind of like our ideal in terms of these, you know, locally functioning systems. Well, rosquillas take a lot of wood because these are traditional stoves. And so they started becoming concerned about their footprint. So they put in a grant with the government of Honduras to put in eco stoves so that they could reduce the amount of wood that they were using and increase their production. They put together this great plan. They sent it to the government. The government actually approved it, and they came and did the whole ribbon cutting and, you know, photos and handshaking, the whole thing. And the money never came. And when they inquired into why the money never came, somewhere between the national government and the community, the money was pocketed by somebody. And, you know, when you try to press these things in a country as corrupt as Honduras, you get nowhere fast. And so the money actually never came, so they had to just kind of keep relying on the way that they were doing things. So this was a big hit to them in terms of their plans to expand and so on. Right around the same time, the drought starts hitting Western Honduras. And they start losing production of corn in these areas, mass losses of production. So again, you know, the corn is all from a local community. So when a local community's crops fail, they no longer have a product to buy locally. And so they then have to buy from a mass producer of maize flour, which increases their prices. They lose profit from that. It's not as good of a product. And so it becomes a problem. But on top of that, remember, like, they're buying corn from the community, which means the community has money that they can spend, but now they have no money. So they're losing also the people that are actually buying their products. So on a local level, people they don't have the money to buy Rosquillas. And that decreases their production. And then their increase in cost of production means that they can't sell as many out in other areas as well. So their business is starting to take a hit. Last year, SAG is the Secretary of Agriculture in Honduras. They put out a notice in Western Honduras to not plant this year. They basically said there's going to be no rain. If you plant, you're going to lose your crops. Don't plant. And this happens right at the same time where all of these things are converging. So, so this company, you know, when we were talking to him, he basically has this nice company. It's all of these different people in the community are involved in it. He employs 10 different families in the community. And he says within 4 to 5 years, he's going to have to close his doors unless something drastically changes. And that is, you know, of course, it has an influence on him, but this has ripple effects throughout many communities where he is supporting their livelihoods by buying their corn. He has people that are working for him, and so on and so forth. So because of this, he's looking at education for his kids and saying, what's the point, right? So he's actually decided to withhold his kids from school, and instead they're going to take the money that they would have used for him to go to school, and they decided to migrate. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the last case study. It's another really interesting one. I can tell you about it another time. This is actually a picture from one of the rivers in Western Honduras. So you can just kind of get a sense of how, this is the dry season, so I don't want to misrepresent. But even in the dry season, this river used to be full of water. And in the wet season, it was basically just teeming with fish and whatever. And so now it's just this little trickle of water. So there's a couple of preliminary takeaways. The first here is that this issue of climate change and the connection to agriculture productivity is having very dire effects, very fast in the western region of Honduras. You know, just all kinds of things that we're seeing converge in terms of the drought, the lack of groundwater, the pests, the freak storms, all kinds of things that are occurring. The other is that there are low or no jobs on farm or off farm. Wages are very low, and there is just no money anywhere to be spent. And the last is that this idea of corruption, gang, and narco intrusion is not separated from the rural areas. It's actually completely interlaced with what's going on. So the main thing that I want people to start thinking about is that this is the issue. It's not one piece here or one piece there. This is a systems problem that is happening in both the ecological zone, the economic system, and the socio-political. And this hasn't even gotten into our actual depth of data analysis yet. So there are other things that are missing, like state violence and several other aspects of climate change and so on and so forth. So what we're seeing is basically this loss of hope. And the people in the rural areas basically feel like they have no other option. And so that is massively driving migration. So for us, next steps, this is about 4,000 of the 6,000 surveys we have. And so we had to pay $1,000 in extra baggage fees to get them all home. It's really fun. And so all of these right now, we are in the middle of like uploading and whatever. The ones with the kids, of course, all have to be verified, because kids are kids and they will sometimes do really funny things and they think they're hilarious. You know, like I'm not going to notice when they like do like that, right? In their responses. Plus when I was in 8th grade, I had to take a survey much like this one. And like, I remember I got to like towards the end and my thought was like, man, I am really boring. I haven't done like anything. So I started being like, yeah, I do drugs all the time. You know what I mean? So we have built into that particular survey some checkpoints. So I have to go through every single one and see and make sure that they're actually valid before you put them in. And then we also have over 100 hours of transcriptions that need to be done. So there's a lot of work and a lot of data analysis. Once we have that done, we built funding into the grant to go back to the 5 municipalities, convene the organizations that are working there for a 2-day platform. The first day we'll share the results of our study, and the second day we'll talk about what they're doing, gaps in their interventions, and how those gaps can be filled through collaboration and so on. I also will be going back in, I think, January to workshop the recommendations to USAID. So I asked them, like, you know, recommendations tend to be like, you need more jobs. It's like, well, obviously they need more jobs. So like, what kind of recommendations would actually be helpful? And their response was like, can you come here and like work with us over a period of a couple of days so that we can develop recommendations that are actually actionable? And it happens to work out really nicely, and they did this on purpose, that I'll be coming back with my results at the same time that they're going to be working on their next 5-year plan. And so they're actually really, really excited about the results, because the plan is to take what I have and roll it directly into their 5-year planning process, which is going to be interesting because they're going to have to rethink these silos that they've built in terms of the way these projects operate, which are very, very separated from one another. And they asked me at the end of this presentation that I gave them, there was like silence, and I was worried that I bored them to death, but really they were just flabbergasted in terms of what was actually going on. And their question was like, well, what do we do? And my response was, I have no idea. You know, so I basically said, like, there are people at my university that are experts in a lot of these little areas that know a lot more about this than me. And so when we have our data analyzed, I'm hoping that I can convene some of these experts into like some type of maybe a half-day or full-day workshop where we can actually look at all this and talk about, like, how do you build realistic cross-cutting interventions that cross these different disciplines in a way that can actually move the bar. So that's my plan, maybe towards later in the semester. And of course, you are all welcome if you're interested in joining them, basically to figure out, now that once we know what's going on, how do we actually do something? Like, how can we actually, you know, where are the pressure points that we can have interventions that can actually make a difference? And so that's the plan. And then I stole a lot of photos, and we took a lot of photos, so there are all those credits. There is a Nick Diaz. Well, he's a graduated MVP student, and he basically ran all of the field work and did an absolutely exceptional job of doing that. I'm more than impressed. And he is currently sitting in Mexico transcribing, hanging out with his girlfriend and transcribing data for me at the same time. Of course, Colleen did her MVP practicum with us, which was really awesome, and she really took the lead on the migration aspect in terms of the qualitative data. And then those initials are our research assistants from Honduras. I did not put their names in the presentation because of the safety issues in terms of they live in Honduras. The situation is serious enough that my lead Honduran is actually moving her apartment after this study. And tons of community guides, school directors, and host families. And that's pretty much it for now. There is a whole lot more. So from there, I'll go ahead and take your questions.
So